Good morning, good morning, California, and wow, yeah, it's morning here in almost morning here in California, and morning in Kenya. Welcome to a moment with Kasisi. This is Kasisi Johnson Kĩriakũ Kĩnyua, coming to you once again live to bring you a session of our Bible study, and where I wrestle with the New Testament Greek. And so far, in the last couple of months, I have been dealing with the book of John, the first chapter of the book of John. And we are now in chapter 2. And today we will be looking at verse 17 to 19. I decided to increase to one more verse because of the nature of what I'm going to talk about today. I hope you are blessed as we continue learning together from the Word of God, and not just learning together, but also digging deeper into understanding some of the background or the background of some of the texts that we deal with. And in this live broadcast, as we wrestle with the Greek text, I also want to raise an important application point. And this is about ignorance, that in most cases, ignorance can expose us. And it does expose us when we show our ignorance of specific facts. And that's what we're going to encounter in the text that we are dealing with today, of people who are supposed to be in the know, people who should be, to whom it would be obvious that Jesus is the Messiah, but their ignorance is so profound that they are unable to see beyond themselves. And our text again today, as I mentioned, is from John 2, and this is from the Greek text, where I do my own translation in English and also in Gĩkũyũ, and it has become my tradition. Instead of just reading the Greek text, I just highlight words that are important. And today we will be talking about, while we're dealing with ignorance, the basic element here is about the sign and the demand of what sign can you show us. And this is T. Simeon Deiknuis. Show us what sign. T here is what sign can you show us in regard to this. And if you can go back a little bit with me before I read at my translation, a quick recap to remind ourselves that Jesus has come from up north, and he has come to Jerusalem, and because it is the Passover period. And when he gets into the temple, we are told, he finds these people who are selling and buying. And we talked about the temple tax, and also I went back into the Old Testament and see the background of all these things. And at the end of our discussion, or the final verse that we dealt with, that is verse 16, Jesus says, "You do not make my Father's house a market house." And that's where we are. Reference to the temple as the Father's house, we dealt with that. And then saying that you cannot make my Father's house a market house. So when you think about it, and when we come now to the verses that we're dealing with, we will look at that element of then show us the sign, and we'll see why that is important. But let me quickly read my own translations here. First in English, the first one, verse 17, I have, his disciples remembered that it had been written, the zeal of your house shall consume me. Arutwo ake makĩririkana atĩ nĩ kwandĩkĩtwo, kĩyo kĩa nyũmba yaku nĩgĩkandĩa. I was unable to get a good word to express the consummation here, but hopefully that suffices. And then verse 18, then the Judeans, remember in my translations, I tried to desist from Jews, but it definitely references here is the Jews. The Judeans answered and said to him, what sign can you show us to account for this? Now, are you there? Makĩmũcokeria makĩmwĩra, nĩ rũũri rũrĩkũ ũgũtuania rwĩgiĩ ũndũ ũyũ? And the final part, Jesus answered and said to them, destroy, and here it is imperative, it's like you, destroy this temple, and I will raise it in 3 days, or in 3 days, I will raise it. But here and I will raise it in 3 days. But most translation will say, in 3 days, I will raise it. Yes, so agĩcokia akĩmera, momorai hekaru ĩno, naniĩ nĩngamĩarahũra thĩinĩ wa matukũ matatũ. One of the not very positive theology that I've encountered, a Christian theology that I've encountered, is the so-called the theology or the theology of replacement. And in this theology, which is, for technical word, is also referred to as supersessionism, theology of replacement, we, in the history of a Christian church, we have heard, and there are people who still propagate this theology, that the Jewish thoughts and Jewish religion has been superseded by the New Testament. So the old is gone, we don't need it, we have the new. And in fact, it's most likely that one of the reasons why these books were named Old Testament and the New Testament came from that, from the theology of replacement. But when you read the Gospels, you realize very quickly that actually there is no replacement. The New Testament church, there would be no New Testament, or there cannot be any claim to New Testament church if there is no Jewish tradition, history, and Judaism. And why do I say this? And this is important in reference on the things that I'm talking about today. Because first of all, Jesus himself came as a Jew. That is one. The first followers of Jesus, whom we have already encountered, some of them like Andrew, Peter, Philip, Nathaniel, and others, were first and foremost Jews. And then the third one is the theological concept, many of them, that we hold today. For example, the idea of one God, monotheism, and not just one God. We have taken up Yahweh or Jehovah as God, living God. That is a Hebrew concept in itself, and the theology that has developed out of that. So there's no way we can separate ourselves from the Tanakh or the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, the Jewish text. And that's what we see in the text that we have just read. The question is about the temple. Jesus has just said that you do not make my Father's house a market house, or a house of selling stuff and all that. Even though, as I mentioned last time, that this was coming out as a result of the requirement for every individual to raise tax. But in in the text that follows, that we just read, verse 17, after Jesus says that you do not make my Father's house a marketplace, the text says the disciples remembered, the disciples of Jesus. We have encountered at least a few of them. We have encountered Nathaniel, Philip, Thomas. We have encountered the brother to Peter, and Peter himself, Andrew and Peter. And, and that group, when they hear the words of Jesus according to John, they remember very quickly, and they say, oh, now we remember that the zeal of your house shall consume me. This, first of all, directs us very quickly into the Tanakh, or the Old Testament. And the words are literally taken out of Psalms 69 and verse 9. In the book of Psalms, this particular Psalm, 69, is actually a lament. The writer references to these enemies who are overwhelming him like a flood. And the writer is crying out to God for salvation. And he says that my love, which is zeal, of course, translated here as zeal, but I like the translation in the Messenger. The Messenger actually translated, because this is the translation of the Messenger of Psalm 69. I love you more than I can say. Because I'm madly in love with you, they blame me for everything they dislike about you. Definitely the New King James Version says, because zeal for your house has eaten me up, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. In this lament psalm, there is an element or a referencing to somebody suffering. And one of the characteristics of the coming Messiah in the Hebrew thought is a suffering servant, as we see in Isaiah 53 and so forth, and the Psalms 22, that speaks of somebody who is suffering, man of sorrow, the suffering servant. So when the disciples remembered very quickly, or when they are prompted by Jesus' action to remember, it is very obvious that they know that, oh yeah, we are talking about the Messiah, and his zeal, his love for the Father's house consumes him. Why is that important? That is important because the disciples in chapter 1 already know. When Andrew goes back to his brother Peter, he says, we have found the Messiah. When Philip goes to talk to Nathaniel, he says the same, that we have found the Messiah. And Nathaniel doubts it and said, what good can come out of Nazareth? So they are aware already that Jesus is the Messiah. But here's the deal on verse 2, number 2. Or even before I get to verse number 2, I would have lost a few things here. That in referencing and in remembering that the Messiah would suffer, they also recall a few things about the temple itself, and the connection of the temple to God and to the Messiah, or Messiah in this case. During the time of Jesus, and when Jesus is speaking now in John, he's referencing to the so-called the second temple. We talked about it last time. And we are almost in the late part of the second temple. This temple we know from history, particularly from history, that is going to be destroyed 40 years after the death of Jesus. It's going to be completely destroyed and is not going to be rebuilt. And that's why we have today, the Wailing Walls of Jerusalem, where the temple stood, the temple that was destroyed in 70 AD, or in the Common Era. So this is the temple we are referring to here. And something about this temple, the second temple that I did mention in my last conversation, was about the sacrificial system was being phased out. And this system is going to die completely with the destruction of the temple. And it's already being replaced slowly by what is called Rabbinic Judaism. And this is a tradition, or a religious tradition, of the Hebrew people that developed particularly in the diaspora, where people did not have the opportunity or the luxury of visiting the temple. Of course, they would make an effort every year to go for their pilgrimage to Jerusalem, but many of them, either they were not capable, some of them were living far off in places like modern-day Iran, and modern-day Iraq, very far away from where the temple was. And therefore, the synagogue system that I again referenced last time, I think a couple of lessons back, developed where they would gather, men, 10 of them, they would gather together and they would look into the Torah or the Tanakh itself, and they would begin, when they come to places of sacrifices, where they are required to sacrifice real animals, instead of now, taking up the real animals, they would begin to reinterpret that text and find new meaning in what the text was happening. And by the time of Jesus, people are finding new meaning, not literally, not just bringing in your cow or your dove or your grains to the temple to be sacrificed and to be given to the priests. Rather, people now are learning new ways of looking at Tanakh and this long history. Now, so when they make this quick connection, you already notice that these are people who know, who understand, who are reading the text. The text is always with them. And one of the requirements within the synagogue system for you to become a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, later, bat mitzvah is a later development, but bar mitzvah, the son of commandment, was you needed to know the whole Torah, and you should be able to recite at least part of the Torah in Hebrew in front of you a rabbi or a group of elders who have taught you how to read and recite the Hebrew text at 13 years. So after that, then you are required to be reading this text. So the Hebrew people, including Jesus when he comes as a human being, know the text. They know the Tanakh. They know the Torah, and they understand every bit of it. And this is why I said it is important for us Christians to appreciate that. Before we dismiss the Jewish religion, before we dismiss the thoughts that are coming from the Hebrew people, we have to acknowledge that their influence into the New Testament is huge. And so there is that connection of the disciples now. They get very quickly, they get it. He is the Messiah, literally. And I hope you can begin to see what I've been talking about here, that there is a micro, there is what is here, right here, when you zero down, but there is the larger story that is unfolding in our eyes as we read John. And that part of that story is the idea of the Messiah, the revelation of the Messiah. Now, right after the disciples make this claim, the word says, according to John again, the Judeans, you can read Hebrew here, or you can read Jews here, they answered him, "What sign can you show us to account for this?" To account for what? To account for the fact that you will not make my Father's house a marketplace. So, what sign can you show us that, first of all, this is your Father's house? I think that is what they're asking. Secondly, can you tell us where do you find these things? You know, again, going back to the question of theology of replacement, you find very quickly that people who are asking Jesus here for a sign, they know Torah. They know the book of Deuteronomy that I read to you last time. And I want to read a portion of it again. Deuteronomy 18, 17, 22. This is about the prophet who is going to come. The Lord said to me, what they say is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites. I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. I myself will call to account anyone who does not listen to my words, that the prophet speaks in my name. Here is the point for today, line number 20. But a prophet who presumes to speak in my name, anything I have not commanded, or a prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, is to be put to death. 21. You may say to yourself, how can we know when a message has not been spoken by the Lord? If what a prophet proclaims in the name of the Lord does not take place or come true, that is a message the Lord has not spoken. That prophet has spoken presumptuously, so do not be alarmed. So these people are coming from somewhere. They know that one way that you test a prophet is by what he predicts or what he talks about. You know, what he says is going to happen. So their demand for a sign in this case is a double-edged sword. That it is leading to the questioning of the authority and the claim that Jesus is making about the Father's house. And they're kind of trapping him into, putting words into him about what he just says. But note again, the word here of sign is Simeon. And it is a similar word that we have encountered in verse 11, where we found that the whole miracle about wine, Jesus turning water into wine, we learned in verse 11 that this was was the first of the many other signs that Jesus was going to produce. Which brings me to my second point, other than the first point of theology of replacement. And the point here is about ignorance. Ignorance of something that you know, that you think you know, yet you don't. The Judeans, or the Jews, are asking Jesus for a sign to prove that he's a prophet. So in their case, a sign is to prove somebody wrong, or to prove that, or to show doubt, that you're doubting what this person is saying. And this is why I said it is a double-edged sword. But in verse 11, the point of the sign of turning water into wine, was to point the disciples to something greater than what they were seeing, the wine. For us Christians, we know that the symbols we use in our midst, symbols like bread, like water, like wine, they actually carry no meaning if they are not pointing you to something else. You can take as many bottles of wine you want. You can eat as many pieces of bread you want. You can be dipped 20, 100 times into water. But if that sign is not pointing you to the greater meaning behind it, it's meaningless. And that is exactly what is happening here. That the sign they're demanding is not a sign that points them to the truth. They're demanding a sign to discount that truth. And this is why I agree with one of my professors at Emory University, who's written, extensively on the book of John, and says that irony is one of the things that the writer in the book of John tends to bring out. And I tend to agree in that it's so ironic that these people, the disciples have just quickly, and the disciples are Hebrews too, they're Jews, they have quickly remembered what the text says. But these Judeans, whom we are going to continue encountering in the book of John, because they play a very important point in the developing themes of the book of John, do not care. They, in fact, challenge the thought. That ignorance of theirs is exposed in line number 20. Because Jesus says to them, okay, you want a sign? Okay, you go ahead, destroy this temple. And the word that is used here for temple is different from the word that we have encountered before. Destroy this temple. The thing is Jesus pointing to the real building right here, this temple here? Or where is he referencing to? What is he referencing to? But we know literally that the temple itself will be destroyed in 40 years to come, right after the death of Jesus Christ. That we know. But at the moment, Jesus is saying, okay, you want a sign? Destroy this temple, and I'm going to raise it. Some translators will translate, Pharaoh here. I think it's Pharaoh. Yeah, I think it's a gyro. Sorry, a gyro here to mean I will raise. I will restore. There's some people who say a gyro as I will restore, but I translated I will raise it. I will raise it in 3 days. These people are not even aware that the temple is going to be destroyed. They're so confident of the temple. But their ignorance of even capturing what is it that Jesus is referring to is profound. That the revelation that is happening right here in chapter 2, confirming what is in chapter 1, that we have found the Messiah, we have found the Messiah, the Son of God in the line of David. And the disciples themselves quote a psalm that is associated with David as the suffering servant. And yet, these Judeans have no clue of what is happening. They don't even understand what he says he means by in 3 days. But literally, according to John, again, this is John's theology now beginning to unfold about the incarnate Christ, that it's not just about incarnation, that there is something else. And in the following verses that we shall be dealing with next week, we see clearly what he meant by by raising it in 3 days. And we already know that as Christians. But the point is the ignorance that these people betray. And this is very common in our midst. We hear all the time people who are supposed to know, but their element of ignorance, sheer ignorance of stuff, is just mind-boggling, if I may say. It's been a sad time here in the United States. And the things that have been happening in the last couple of days have exposed the ignorance that many people hold on to. People who think they know the Constitution, people who think they know history, people who think they know politics, they understand politics, people who even betray the very idea of God. I mean, you should have heard some people talk about on that particular day that people are storming the Capitol, talking about God being in the midst. And people, when they got inside, guns bracing and all kinds of manner, and with all the curses and all that, they would dare kneel down to pray. You know, and the same, you know, in our journeys as Christians, sometimes we, you know, we expose our ignorance even though we do pretend that we know. But when it is challenged, when that ignorance is challenged, it exposes us in a way that is not good for the body of Christ. So mine is to challenge you and myself that even as we continue dealing with the theological, the historical, and the interpretation aspect of these texts, that we should also not lose sight in some of the applicable things, lessons that we can learn from the text. And today, thing is sometimes, and most of the time, ignorance exposes us. And that is exactly what we are seeing with these disciples, that ignorance exposes them in a way that we cannot even begin to imagine. I thank you so much for walking with me in this journey. We have so many other lessons ahead of us. Slowly by slowly, we continue learning what is it that John wanted us as Christians to know. But in the meantime, I remind you that the theology of replacement has no place in understanding our Christian journey. If you want to understand our Christian journey, we need to embrace the two texts, the Tanakh, the Hebrew text, and the Christian text, which is the New Testament. We need to read them side by side and understand why these texts say the things that they say and what is it that God wanted to reveal to us. If you were blessed by this teaching, once again, I invite you to like this message, to share this message, to comment. I love comments and challenge my interpretation. And you can also visit me at my YouTube channel as indicated here below. And I'm sure you will not miss my lessons. And if there is any other lesson that you'd want to go back to, you can always come back to it. In the meantime, be blessed and know that ignorance can be fatal. It can lead us to destruction. But we know that when we embrace the truth, we shall always be successful. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you until we meet again next week. Amen.